Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Preparing for the IEP, presented by Ann Wilson. My name is Pam Christie, the PTI Director at Peak Parent Center. And before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. All of you will have your audios muted during the presentation, and you'll have an opportunity to submit text questions in the chat box, which is at the very bottom of your screen. And then I will be monitoring the chat window throughout. And if there's time at the end, I will be asking those questions in the order they were received, and Ann can answer those. Closed captioning will be added after the webinar and before we add it to Peak's website. So as you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey evaluation about the presentation. And if you could please, it just will take a few minutes, just a couple quick questions. If you could please fill that out and provide your feedback. We're always trying to improve services here at Peak Parent Center. So again, welcome to today's webinar, Preparing for the IEP. You should have received the PowerPoint and the handouts yesterday. And it's my pleasure to introduce Ann, who will take it from here.
Thank you, Pam. And I'm going to launch a poll just to find out more about who's with us today, and I'll launch this while I introduce myself. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us today. Again, my name is Ann Wilson, and I work at Peak Parent Center. I work on parent training and information, alternative dispute resolution, as well as transition. My experience with the IEP process is as a parent. I have a child who entered in preschool coming straight from the early intervention program. I do want to acknowledge that Peak is a parent training and information services, and we'll be talking about IDEA, which is a detailed legal framework, and we do not provide legal advice or legal services. The slide we're looking at now has an image of a school bus with a line of children entering the bus, and that image will repeat throughout the program. And let's see, it looks like we've got, so our poll, I'll end the poll. It looks like we've got parent, I can share the results, I think, but we're parents for the most part, but we do have an educator. It looks like maybe a dual role. And most of you are in the young stages of pre-K or elementary. Okay, so that's good to know. So you can see our poll results. Okay. So this webinar today is the first of a three-part series. Today we'll be talking about preparing for the IEP, including evaluation and eligibility. Next Thursday, we will talk about the content of the IEP, and the following Thursday, we'll cover implementation and follow-up of the IEP. This slide gives bullet points that what we're going to cover today. The first is to understand the basics of IDEA 2004, specifically related to IEPs. Next, we'll cover evaluation, then eligibility and consent for services, a little bit about the IEP process, and then tips for preparing for the IEP meeting. So IDEA 2004 is the latest reauthorization of the federal law on special education. IDEA makes available a free, appropriate public education and ensures special education and related services to eligible children with disabilities. And the federal law provides a floor, so the states can provide more, and so your law will vary from state to state, but they can't provide less than the federal law. Here are some key purposes of the law. I'll just read these. It wants to ensure that children with disabilities receive educational benefit so they can progress grade to grade, having access to the general education curriculum and be educated with their non-disabled peers. To provide supports and services needed for children with disabilities to become productive adults, contributing to the community, and ensure parents are equal partners. And that's a really important part, and we're glad that you're all here to learn more to help you in that role. So the IDEA includes two fundamental requirements: that the child will receive a free, appropriate public education, which we often refer to as FAPE, in the least restrictive environment, which you'll hear referred to as the LRE. So looking at that, free means no cost. Appropriate means that the eligible students get the services that are appropriate for their unique needs. Public means that it's supervised by the public school, and services are usually offered in the public school, though not always. And then education means special education and related services. Um, and the least restrictive environment means that students with disabilities are educated with non-disabled peers to the maximum extent possible. This includes extracurricular activities and may include supplementary aids and services if needed to enable them to be educated with their peers. It's important to note that the LRE is not a place. It doesn't refer to the location. It's about learning with peers, and that may happen in different ways. Also, IDEA has very specific procedures that must be followed. If you're already involved in the process, you've probably at least once received a copy of your procedural safeguards, but you'll be receiving those throughout. These are designed to protect the rights of parents and their child with a disability, and also give families and school systems mechanisms by which to resolve their dispute. The process can be overwhelming, and it can be hard to keep all this information in your head. Sometimes I hear parents say that, they really just want to be a parent, and so it's hard to keep track of all this stuff when you're in special education. So I want to just give a shout out to our parent advisors at Peak Parent Center, and I think we'll have more information about them at the end. But they're always available if you have a question about what's happening, or if you want to talk about something specific to your situation. When legal process does arise in special education, often it relates to whether FAPE has been provided. So the most recent Supreme Court case on special education was in 2017. The case actually came from Colorado, so you may have heard about it. It was in Douglas County, I believe. The Supreme Court issued a unanimous ruling on the standard for FAPE, holding that to meet its substantive obligation under the IDA, a school must offer an IEP reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress, appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. So this case came about because the last Supreme Court, which addressed FAPE, had been in 1982. So the cases don't get to the Supreme Court very often. And there was a conflict between circuits as to what the standard for educational benefit was. And here, the 10th Circuit had applied what was called a merely more than de minimis standard, which really isn't very much. And so the Supreme Court held that that was too low of a standard. So here are some key points, and I'll read these again from the slide. You want to make sure that you don't accept an IEP with the same goals and objectives year to year. This indicates that your child has failed to make meaningful progress toward goals and objectives if they continue to be the same. Your goals need to be appropriately ambitious and at the same time reasonably calculated to enable your child to achieve passing marks and advance from grade to grade, considering his or her circumstances. And you want to raise your own expectations for your child. Think big and believe in their competence. The IEP should allow your child to progress both academically and functionally. So think about, has the IEP team adequately considered performance problems from the past year and your input concerning writing the goals, objectives, and assessing what services, including related services, are needed? You should expect progress monitoring with data and detailed information. And you want to see progress in the short term. Don't wait until the end of the year to raise concerns about progress if you're not seeing it during the year. You really want to maintain communication with your IEP team. Ask for benchmarking toward the annual goals, even if short-term objectives aren't required. And focus on your child's current circumstances instead of their quote, forever diagnosis. Focus on individualization and ask questions of teachers. So I'm going to launch just another quick poll to get a sense of, what level of experience the people on the call today have, or on this webinar today. So if you can just let us know if you're new to the process, if you have some experience, maybe you're seasoned. Sometimes, when you start, you put a lot of energy into getting all this information, and over time you kind of forget. So it looks like we're kind of split between new and some experienced, one seasoned. I'll share. So in order to qualify for special education services, your student must first have a disability or disabilities, and also need special education and related services in order to access the general curriculum. So the student must have unique needs that can't be addressed through education in the general education classes alone, with or without accommodations, and requires specially designed education. So you will have students with disabilities who aren't eligible for special education under IDEA. They may be able to have their needs met through accommodations under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So the first step is to determine whether a student qualifies for special education, and that starts with the evaluation. And this can come about either by the request of the parents, and then the school considers it, or the school may suggest it. It is the school's obligation to identify students, but if you have concerns, go ahead and discuss them with your school. Don't wait for them to come to you. So schools must notify parents and describe the procedures and obtain consent. That's part of getting your procedural safeguard notice. They must use a variety of assessment tools to determine if the child has a disability under the IDEA, and then those assessments will determine what will be put into the IEP, creating their individualized education program. And you want to make sure it's a comprehensive evaluation. Sometimes you might have a concern in a single area, but there may be issues in areas that you haven't thought of. So you want to make sure the team really makes sure they're getting all the evaluations they need. The evaluation has to be not discriminatory or have racial or cultural biases, and parents must be given copies of any evaluation reports. When is an evaluation needed? Because it starts with an evaluation to determine eligibility. You will always have one before a child enters the special education system. And thereafter, not more than once a year, unless the school and parents agree otherwise. Sometimes some of the testing instruments actually have limits on how often you can do them. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't receive progress reports during the year. And then once every 3 years, you'll have your triennial reevaluation, unless you agree that it's not needed. But every 3 years, you need to determine that you're still eligible for special education. For a reevaluation, you'll review what existing data that you have, and then determine what else is needed if your child continues to have a disability, and in many cases they will. Determine their present levels of achievement, and again, determine if they need to continue with special education, and if changes are needed to meet IEP goals and participate in the general curricula. You may find that there's an area that they didn't need services before, but now do, or you may find that they have an area where they had services and no longer need those. If you disagree with the school's evaluation, you can request an independent educational evaluation. And again, this is if you disagree. So this doesn't happen until you've had an evaluation, because there has to be an evaluation that you disagree with. The independent educational evaluation is at the public expense. The school pays for it if you disagree with the evaluation. They can request a hearing to show that that this is not appropriate and not pay for the independent educational evaluation. And you can only make one request. So if you request an independent educational evaluation and you aren't happy with that, you can't ask the school to pay for another one. Functional behavior assessment is another type of evaluation. If you're seeing, if you have concerns about behavior, this may be part of your eligibility evaluation or your determination of what services are needed. And it may also come about in other ways, in cases of discipline, or if they are considering suspension. So there's other circumstances when it's required. And what it does is look at why the child behaves as he or she does, given what is happening in the environment. It helps to learn about the behaviors and knowing when and where they're likely to happen. And it helps to help plan positive strategies to learn new behaviors in that environment. And we want to remember that all behavior is communication. And so whatever is happening is probably the result of some need or something that's not being met, and the student may not be able to express that in the way that that we would typically understand. And so that's why there are people who come in and do these functional behavior assessments. So once you've completed all the evaluation and have the data, you will determine if the student is eligible for special education service. The parents and the school staff will meet and decide if there is a need. The child cannot be determined to have a disability because of a lack of appropriate instruction or limited English proficiency. If that is the case, there are other things that they do in that situation. So this doesn't mean your child won't get support. It just means that special education isn't the avenue for that support. Sometimes, particularly if eligibility isn't contentious, often your eligibility and IEP development meeting will happen at the same time. If there's some question of whether there's eligibility or not, you may have a meeting just to determine eligibility. Consent is one of the parents' right. In certain circumstances, the law requires that they must give consent. And so parents' permission is needed before the initial special education and related services are given. So if your child is determined eligible and that they need special education to access the general curriculum, you need to give consent for them to give those services. If you refuse services, the district can't use due process to get consent. And there are relatively new regulations that parents can revoke consent for special education and related services. If you do choose to do that for whatever reason, and then you later decide you actually want to have special education, you will have to go through the process again. So that's something you want to get information on and make sure you really want to do that before you make that decision. Okay, so the IEP process, and these timelines are also included in your procedural safeguards, but within 30 days of completing the evaluation, an IEP meeting will occur, and within that meeting, the IEP is written determining the child's needs and eligibility. Again, you'll have your initial IEP meeting, and thereafter you will have an annual meeting, and then your triennial meeting where you redetermine eligibility. Those are the prescribed meetings, but you can communicate, and you should communicate with your team throughout the year and get information. And you can request a meeting if there's an issue, or if you feel like things aren't working, you can request to have a meeting not at the specified time. So if you have concerns, don't wait till your next meeting, at least bring them up with your team members so that you can have a conversation. And I believe in our next slide, we will talk about required IEP team members and excusing members from meetings, as well as amending IEPs. So let's see. Yes. Required IEP team members. So the law specifically states who is required to be at the IEP team meeting. First, and very important, are parents. And the role of parents is a little different in special ed, or I don't know if it's in special education. The parents are really expected to be meaningful participation is the term that they use in the law, but it's really important that parents are involved. And I know for me, when I started, it wasn't a role that I was sort of comfortable with, because I thought, oh, teachers, they really know what this process is and I don't understand it. But you just have information that the teachers aren't going to have, and you have a different view, a more holistic view of the child and where they come from and how they are outside of school. So that role is so critical. Not less than one regular education teacher, not less than one special education teacher, a school district representative, and that person should be someone who can commit resources. So when you're in the meeting, the school district representative should be there so that you don't have, well, I don't know if we can do that, we'll have to check, because that person should be at the meeting. And then a person to explain evaluation results. And that's so that someone can explain what the evaluation results mean. It does not necessarily have to be the person who gave the evaluation. It has to be someone who can explain those results to you. So in some cases, that person could be your special education teacher. In my experience, that when you're doing the triennial reevaluation, you'll have more evaluations and more results to look at. And so at least in my meetings, I would often have the person who did do the evaluations at those meetings, but not necessarily in the annual meetings. There are also optional IEP team members. That would be related services staff who work with the child. And there's kind of this category of others who know the student. And that can be, sometimes people will bring in, say, if you have an outside professional who works with your child regularly, you might bring that person in. Sometimes people will bring in a family friend. Sometimes when I was starting out in this process, people would say, bring someone to support you to the meeting. And so sometimes people will just bring a friend to be there with him, someone who knows the student and knows the family. And then finally, you can bring the student himself or herself. Later on, when you reach transition age, I know there's no one in the poll who indicated they were at that stage, but later on when you're discussing the transition, the student is required to be invited to the meetings. But it's becoming more common. More schools are doing student-led IEPs, at least in high school, and some are doing it earlier. It helps the student to be engaged and develop agency. So if appropriate and it makes sense, it's helpful to have your student attend at least some or part of the meetings. Excusing IEP team members, and again, there are rules on this. Team members may be excused when the member's area of curriculum is not being changed or discussed, but the parent and the school district have to agree in writing. So there'll be an excusal form that you'll be asked to sign. Or if that person's area of curriculum is being discussed and instead of attending, they can give a written report before the IEP meeting if the parent consents in writing to the excusal and the school agrees. And sometimes you may have people on your team that have varying levels of involvement. For example, if your student gets a small amount of occupational therapy, that person may have limited contact, and so maybe they might submit a report. But you want to be mindful of who the person is. If the person is someone that's really critical to the writing of the IEP or the implementation of the IEP, if you think that they're important to be there, you shouldn't consent to excusing them because you won't be able to write the IEP as it should be. So really think about who should be there if you're asked to excuse someone. Oh, I'm sorry, there are check marks here. And again, so carefully consider before agreeing to excuse IEP team members. And I think this comes up more often than you might think, just because the teachers and professionals have big caseloads and they're scheduling a lot of meetings and there's a lot of conflicts, and sometimes the scheduling of the IEP can be difficult. So it is something that to think about when it comes up. Okay, so tips for the IEP meeting. Number one is communication, communication, communication. And that is something is that it really is a team. And for this process to work and for your child to get the best IEP and the best implementation, the more you can build relationships and be in communication with your team members can really help. You want to monitor emotions. This process, again, as I said, is it's very overwhelming, and special education is just one piece of your life, and so you may be dealing with medical issues, you may be dealing with just a variety of other personal issues, and so it can be overwhelming, and it can be hard. Sometimes people's kids really struggle in school and it can be hard to see what your child's going through. And so it is very emotional. And that's not to say that emotions don't come up in the IEP meeting. They often do. I don't know. I have met very few people who have said they haven't cried at one point in an IEP meeting. So it's definitely okay to have emotions, and everyone understands that it's emotional. So it's not that, you want to forget that this is a very emotional piece, but you just want to be mindful of your emotions and not let them interfere with developing the best plan of support for your child. And again, it is really important to just build relationships with the team. I think that really helps your child, because the child really is the center of this process. It helps them to have the best experience the more that the team is working together and not disagreeing. And we like to use a quote from Stephen Covey. I believe this is habit number 5, and you've probably heard it before, from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But the idea is to first seek to understand, then to be understood, because it's easy to come into the meeting with a view of what we think needs to happen. But we do want to take advantage of the perspectives of everyone at the table, because everyone has different information and different expertise. And so we do want to try and understand what everyone's bringing to the table before we make decisions and form judgments about what we think should happen. So that's probably a really key thing to keep in mind as you approach the IEP meeting. It's what you say. It's what you say and how you say it. And again, this is a thing, sometimes you'll come to the meeting and you won't say something in your best way because it is very emotional and it's a hard thing to do. Some people recommend, if you're feeling really emotional before a meeting, if you're upset about it, maybe have a friend or someone that you can talk to before the meeting to kind of process some of those emotions, so that when you come to the meeting, you kind of have a better idea of what you want to communicate, and so that you're able to communicate that effectively. So these points: be clear, calm, and direct, listen, and take time to think. That's one of the things, there's research that we often spend our time thinking about how we're going to respond rather than listening. And so we may not hear the complete thought that someone's communicating. Come prepared. And I think that's really important for parents is you are an active participant in this. So you do want to hopefully, and if you haven't been given documents to look at beforehand, you can always ask. And right now we're in this virtual environment where most meetings are being held online. So it's extra important that materials be shared before the meeting so that people can work with them. But ask questions before the meeting if you have them, about what's going to be discussed. If you have a concern, let your team know that you'd like that to be on the agenda. And really think about what's important to you in the IEP and at the meeting. I think sometimes I've gone to meetings and people would say, well, what do you want to happen? And sometimes I wouldn't have an answer. And so I've learned over the years to kind of think through and kind of outline what I want before I go. and be persistent. Another thing that can be really helpful and something that I have a really hard time with is to just keep notes of things that happen, because the more you sort of keep track of things, the better information you have to bring to the meeting. And also recognize that we're all overwhelmed in this process. The demands on the teachers, the demands on the service provider are very high. The documentation requirements are high. And so if you don't get a response, just ask again, not in a, not suggesting that they're doing anything wrong. It's just overwhelming the amount of information that everybody's processing. So you may need to be persistent in getting an answer. Again, monitoring emotions. So before the meeting, know what your emotions are. It's okay to feel emotions. They're a natural part of the human experience. And as I said, if you're really angry or sad and you need to vent before the IEP meeting, go ahead and do that. Get those feelings out. Think about how you want to express them when you get to the meeting, because you don't want to derail the meeting. And the meeting time is valuable. You want to use that meeting developing the best plan of support you can for your child. Building relationships. Thank school staff, offer to help your child's teacher, respond to notes. Some schools offer home visits. Take advantage of those opportunities to get to know your school's team. I've done things like before the school year starts, bring my student in to meet the teacher, take a tour of the school, things that help both my student feel more comfortable and have the staff understand that you're interested in what's happening at school with your student. Give feedback on schools' efforts to welcome and engage parents. It's good I think schools are always trying to find better ways to reach parents. And so if you find something that they're doing well, let them know so they can keep doing that. Suggest ways that work to keep in touch with you. Notebook, email, phone. Everybody has ways of communication that work. And then also recognize that your teachers are communicating with a lot of parents as well. So you need to be patient as well. Let your team know what works for your child at home. And some things, there may be things, for example, I have a child who smiles all the time. And so I would often hear from the teachers how happy my child is all the time, but he smiles no matter what, because if he's nervous, if he's afraid, that's just how he carries himself. And so every year I would have to let the team know, just because he's smiling, that does not mean things are okay. And so there's sometimes information that you have that's really helpful for the team to know, and you want to share that. And be willing to admit mistakes. This is a process of trial and error and learning. There's so much evolving in our understanding and of things we can do. And so sometimes we think something and later on we regret that, or we rethink it. And so just be willing to admit mistakes and be human in the process. Ask for help and listen. So it's an interactive process, and it is trial and error. And so sometimes you just have to try things and see how it works, because we don't necessarily know how any child's going to respond to a particular intervention. So some final tips to prepare. I think I've gone too fast, Pam. Some final tips to prepare for the IEP. In your email that you received, you should have received an IEP preparation packet. And that's helpful to think through things. Keep records, as I mentioned. And when we say keep, I mean, you do want to keep, when I started the IEP process, everyone said, get a binder and keep all your stuff in order. I once saw a cartoon that said, we need to buy a second house for our IEP records. And I really feel like I had a binder and that binder got full, and then I had another binder, and then I ended up, life got busy, and then I just have a stack. So you want to keep all those things in the best order you can, but you don't have to have a formal system. Some places have logs. There's a source called Rights Law that has some good information on keeping records. I think Disability Law Colorado has created a form for parents to use during COVID to keep track of things. So there's some logs you can use. Maybe you just make notes on your calendar, because what's important, some people use their phones. What's important is you find a system that works for you, and don't come up with something that you feel like you have to do that you're not able to then maintain. But just another practice is helpful to, if you have a conversation with one of your team members, you could follow up with an email. Just say, hey, thanks for talking today. As I understand, this is what we're going to do now. And then you have the email, and you also are confirming that you're on the same page about what you talked about. As I mentioned, we have parent advisors on staff at Peak Parent Center, and they can provide one-on-one support. You can call with questions. If they don't have the answer, they can refer you to where you can get that information. A lot of times parents will say that this process feels very isolating, and we at Peak Parent Center don't want you to feel that way. We want you to know that there are people, there are so many people that have gone through this process as well. And I think having felt isolation themselves, people are eager to provide support, or, if you can connect with them. So please call Peak Parent Center with any questions that you have, especially as they come up, because as you go through the process, you'll find different issues will come up along the way. And so our next webinar in the series will be the content of the IEP, and then we'll really talk more about goals and things that go into the IEP. And then the following week will be implementation and follow-up of the IEP. Resources are those that were included in the PowerPoint, which you should have a copy of. The Parent Center Hub is a national center that has a lot of information for parents, and so you can go there. You can also sign up for their newsletter, and they'll send you an email. It is really helpful right now when there's a lot of things changing. So there's some things that are helpful tips relating to COVID. We, as you noticed, the latest reauthorization of IDEA was 2004. So we're, what is that, 17 years now? People have been talking about the next reauthorization for a long time, but we're having a changing administration. Maybe there'll be some attention to that coming soon. But so it's helpful just to kind of get information about what's happening. There's also a federal website, IDEA ed.gov, again, COVID-19 resources for school. And then Colorado Department of Education has some great information that can help you with state-specific things, as well as they also have information on the federal law. And again, Peak Parent Center, please check out our website and take advantage of our parent advisor services. And I think coming up, so I mentioned we have additional webinars in this series. We also have other webinars. I mentioned communication. We do have a series of webinars related specifically to communication in the IEP process, and you can learn more about the opportunity for facilitated IEPs. Our parent advisors are available we have Spanish speaking and English speaking advisors. There are some regional parent connectors. We currently do not provide workshops across the state, but we hope to do that again. But we do have things happening online, and you can read our blog. And our conference is coming up next month, February 18th, 19th. I think there's a little bit on the 20th. Is also online, unfortunately, because when it's in person, it's a great opportunity to connect with people who are interested in and care about inclusion, and you can get a lot of great information. So check out our website if you want to get more information. There's time to register, and there's some great speakers that are really forward thinking, and you'll hear about a lot of things that may or may not be happening in your school, but it's a great way to connect with others and get resources and inspiration.
And as part of that virtual conference, we will have a youth summit for 16 to 21-year-olds. And this year we are offering scholarships to parents and youth to attend. So if that's something you're interested in receiving, please look at our website.
And so I think I did go, I went fast, but
That's all right, Ann.
but that gives us time for questions. So if anyone has questions, I'm gonna stop sharing.
If you have any questions, if you could just post them in the chat. And just as soon as we are able to add captions to this webinar recording, we will post it to our website under archived webinars. And today we are doing a random drawing for a rights law book all about IEPs. And I put all of your names in mini web tool just now. And the random name is, let's see who the winner is. It's scrolling, it's scrolling.
Whoa.
Okay, let's see. Brianna, okay. So Brianna, did I say your name right? You're the winner. So I will send you a book. So you are a parent, so that's great. So if you could, you don't have to put in the chat your address. What I'll do is just confirm it with you via email, and then I'll be able to send that out to you. So congratulations. Like Ann said, we will be having the next series is the 21st. We sure hope that you can join us. We'll also be doing another random drawing. We do have a question. Thank you, Robert. Is this recording available to watch after the session? Yes, it will be. It has to be closed captioned first, and then it will be sent. It'll be posted on our website. So I'll get that for you for sure. Thank you for asking for that. And then to request a certificate of completion, just email me. I'm going to put my email in here right now. So it's pchristie@peakparent.org. So that's if you want a certificate of completion. You can ask at any time for that. And thank you, Ann, to our wonderful presenter and to everyone that attended today. Again, if you have any other questions, please contact any parent advisor at Peak. They work due to COVID. They are working Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 3. And then you can always email them at parentadvisor@peakparent.org. Why would we need, okay, thank you, Rob. Why would we need a certificate of completion? That's a great question. Some people like to have that for professional development because there are some professionals that we're on. And as a parent, it's just a nice form of documentation that you have received some parent training. So if anybody was to be like, where'd you get that information? If you quoted anything that we said, you would have that certificate. But that's a great question. Thank you. And then our number at Peak is 719-531-9400. Our email is our website is www.peakparent.org. And again, as you exit the webinar, please take just a moment to complete our evaluation survey, as we value your feedback and we want to improve services here at Peak. So on behalf of Peak Parent Center and today's presenter, thank you so much for attending, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Was that it? Did someone out there have a question? I thought I saw a raised hand.